Hello and welcome to the show. This is Monday night's show, and I am so excited to talk about some really critical topics. But before I do, I'm going to ask you to do what I always do, which is to please call your friends, your family, your crew, your posse, anybody who listens to you, and tell them to support our show, either by subscribing on Patreon or by liking and subscribing. Follow us on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram, or any of the other platforms in which we are found. Bottom line is, the more people that know about the show, the better. So let's jump right into it. Today I want to talk about, first of all, the exciting news that Secretary Cardenas, who is our new Secretary of Education, was confirmed and sworn in today. Very, very good news about that. But I want to talk about more specifically what that means vis-a-vis what's going on in the states in public education. The other thing that I want to talk about is a little bit about how vaccine rollout has been going. Now, obviously, there's some places where it's going out really, really well, and there's some places where it's going really, really badly. And I want to talk a little bit about what's going on here in Florida, because it's kind of like the vaccine Hunger Games down here in Florida. And it shouldn't surprise you that it's going in a reflective of the values of the governor of our state. So we're going to talk about that. But first, let's get to this Secretary of Education. Let me give you a little context as to why this matters. I mean, obviously, you know that Betsy DeVos was an atrocious Secretary of Education. She was the Secretary of Diseducation. Like, she was put in that position to dismantle public education. But a lot of you may not understand why the GOP has such an antipathy towards public education. So we got to talk about that first. The reason that the GOP has such an antipathy towards public education is actually pretty multifaceted. First of all, they have an antipathy towards public education because they dislike teacher unions. And anytime you see major, large union working forces, you're going to find a bullseye that was painted by GOP legislators on it. Be it the United States Postal Service, which has a huge union components, or be it public schools or airlines or whatever. I mean, they just don't like unions. They want management to have all say and employees to have no say, because they feel like that's how companies can be efficient and productive and, of course, make more money for stockholders and exploit labor. That's one of the reasons, is that by cannibalizing funds from public education and reducing the number of public educators out there, you're also weakening teacher unions. And by weakening teacher unions, you now give one of the major investors in Democratic campaigns a whole lot less money to work with. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason, which is more pernicious, quite frankly, is that from very long ago, there has been this perception that public education is wealthy white people funding the education of poor black children, or poor children just generally. And that wealthy people can afford to educate their own kids, and poor people can't, and therefore it is an imposition on wealthy people to use their taxes to educate the poor. So they don't like it. They would rather, you educate your kid in whatever way you can with whatever resources you have. Of course, that particular attitude just does not work in a country that depends on a large middle class to drive its economy, because that large middle class is made up of workers and consumers. And consumers earn wages based on their education and their ability to participate in the economy. So America's entire economic structure is predicated on the notion that we are putting out enough people with enough talents and skills development to be able to be workers and to be able to be consumers in our economy. And you certainly cannot do that if the only people who get educated are the people who can pay for full-time education of their own kids. And nobody can really do that. I mean, you can see that there's a big trend, especially on the right, to homeschool their kids. And that really often means is that one or both parents are at home to do that. Well, that's quite a luxury. Most families cannot afford for either parent to be at home all day. And we're learning during this pandemic that when they have to make the choice, it's the mom who stays home. And we're having real problems in our workforce now because of the number of women who are leaving the workforce to do nothing but take care of the kids or watch the kids. But it's not like they actually have the skill set sometimes to teach their kids advanced anything. Like, I can't claim that I can do 8th grade mathematics these days, because it doesn't look like what 8th grade mathematics looked like when I was a kid, and I was never all that great at math anywho. So if I was babysitting or helping a child learn, would I have the skill sets to explain math and computer science to them? No. That's why we have professionals. That's why we hire teachers, and that's why teachers are held to a certain standard. They have to keep their knowledge and skill set up to date and relevant, and not just keeping their own knowledge up to date, but also learning how to actually impart that kind of knowledge to young people. That is not just watching kids as they do, exercises in a handbook, right? You literally have to get a child to understand a concept and get them excited about learning and keep them curious about learning. And that is a real talent, and it's one that I personally value. So Betsy DeVos was put into place by the Trump administration for the express purpose of dismantling public education from the top down. And she was kind of met halfway by governors like Ron DeSantis, who want to dismantle public education from the bottom up. It should surprise no one that Florida has one of the lowest teacher compensations packages in the country. And we have a very difficult time recruiting teachers to the state. They're not valued when they get here. And it's a difficult state to operate in. I mean, if you recall, after Parkland, there are a whole bunch of Republicans thinking that we should make our teachers, SWAT as well, like, arm them and make them take weapons training. Well, I know a lot of folks who want to be teachers who have zero interest whatsoever in becoming, armed guardians. Like, that's not their ministry. And so, it should surprise you not at all that there are some teachers who really balked at that. Also, you should understand that what it takes to be a teacher becomes more and more difficult and complex, but the compensation doesn't necessarily catch up with that. There are so many teachers that are pulling out of their own resources, out of their own pockets, just to get materials to their students. And we think that's okay. I don't think that's okay. And so we now know that the Secretary of Education's role in prioritizing national education policy is going to be really, really important. Another area where the Secretary of Education is super important is with respect to student debt. Betsy DeVos was on the side of the lenders in everything, especially the predatory lenders. She was trying to figure out how to make people eat as many loans as possible, have to pay back as many loans, especially loans that were deceitful and exploitative from the get-go. She wanted to make sure that rich investors got all their money, and she didn't care about education, the quality of education, and she sure the hell didn't care about students. So it is a breath of fresh air to have the 180 in Secretary Cardenas. He's an educator, was a principal. He's worked his way through public education. He believes in public education. He believes in public education unions. And most of all, he believes in students. He believes in the idea and the mission of ensuring that all Americans have the ability to make the most of their gifts and talents and to develop them, because that's to the benefit of all of us, most especially the entirety of our economy. You cannot claim that everything that makes this country function is driven by people who get private school educations. That's just not true. And so we have to invest in the education of all children, no matter how much it irks Republicans to do so. Public education is a critical component to how our economy functions. It goes way beyond just teaching X's and O's to young people. It prepares them in both their intellectual skills and also their behavioral norms to actually function in our economy. It is my opinion, however, that our entire education system needs a bit of an update, or maybe not even a bit. Maybe it needs an entire overhaul to start from what our 2035, 2040 economy is going to look like and what our students need to be prepared for that economy. We started our curriculum way, way, way back, right between the First and Second World Wars, and have updated it from after World War II. It went from, thinking that an 8th grade education was enough to 12th grade education was enough. And that is still under the premise that the majority of people are going to be worker bees in some kind of big corporate enterprise. That's just not the case in the future. AI is going to take over a whole lot of what we already do. Mechanization has already taken over a lot of what skilled labor has done. And so we need to have a whole different conversation about what our education system is supposed to be. It ought to still be in the business of allowing people to develop their gifts and talents to maximum effect. Also ought to be teaching them how to be good and fruitful citizens. But when it comes to being economically viable workers, what does it really mean? Right? You're not going to be putting widget A in whole B anymore because machines are going to be doing that. right? You're probably not going to be driving people anywhere or busing people anywhere because machines are probably going to do that too. So what are you going to be doing? We are going to have to prepare people to be more in the service industries, creative people, and people who are, sort of their own entrepreneurs. We're going to have a whole lot more of our economy that basically works for itself with whatever creative thing they can come up to market and sell. Because it's just middle management, which is what so many people aspired to in the 50s and 60s, is just not a thing anymore. And we need to come to understand it. I trust Secretary Cardenas to have a honest, in-depth look at our education standards, at the resources that we provide for our students, and to ask the question whether 12th grade is enough. Do we really need to have 14 grades? So that those last 2 years are really what we now call community college, preparation for an actual industry. And should that be part of what we consider basic education? Right? Should we be breaking up the school day in a totally different way than it currently is broken up? Should we be breaking up the school year in a totally different way than it currently is broken up? I know that, we got used to having the summers off. As a kid, I loved having summers off. But was it the best thing for my education? No. Do you know why we had the summers off? Because we started in an agrarian society where the summer was the season that people were, out there working in the fields with their family. Right? They harvested at the end of the summer, August, September, and then they could go to school. That made sense in an agrarian society. Are we an agrarian society anymore? Does that still make sense? What happens in that long period over the summer is that people lose their education that they got, and they spend the first few weeks of school in the fall, kind of recatching up to what they forgot. I also think that we need to think more about how the school day is structured. I mean, let's think about it. We, young kids, under the age of 10 are real sprightly and energetic in the morning. Teenagers, not so much. So why should teenagers start class at 7:30 or 8 in the morning? That's not when they're alert, right? So how about we have teenagers start school at 10 a.m. and go later, because that's really what their biological systems are going to respond to. There's a lot of things that we need to look at to make education more effective and more efficient. But more importantly, we need leadership that reestablishes the national commitment to public education and confronting those who aren't committed to that. I am so glad that Betsy DeVos is no longer the Secretary of Education. That woman was a horror show. And I'm so grateful that today we can say education is back front and center in the United States of America. If you like what you just heard, you can find out so much more and hear so much more on my Patreon channel, patreon.com/Pam Keith FL. That's where you hear the rest of this discussion, and there's lots more to share.